right, Collin, it's all yours, buddy.
All right.
Okay. Hello, Collin.
Hey,
Tim
Tim.
Henning from Minnesota. Collin, you talked about the animal ID program. One of the questions of many that I have is, what is going to be the cost of the total program? What will be the cost to farmers individually? And what protections do we have that the packers won't use that information against us?
In the Farm Bill, can you hear this? In the Farm Bill, we put a requirement that all of the information in the livestock markets has to be reported every day to everybody in the country. I think that's the biggest change, the most positive thing we've done in that whole arena. Everybody's going to have the same information at the same time. That's going to help that whole situation. Well, that's what we're going to try to work on. I mean, if we have spent more money to date on and National Animal ID than we would have had to spend to do the program and to pay for all the ear tags for every farmer. We basically wasted the money. Canada put their system up for $10 million. Now, they don't have as many cattle and livestock, but, you know, New Zealand did it for $6 million. You know, so that's part of what we're going to work on. You know, my original idea was to have the government pay for the readers and the tags to start with to get the thing going. There is a lot of information that can be used positively by farmers that can be gleaned out of this. If you add value to these things within your local area, and they've done that in some states. So it's not just a cost issue, I don't believe, once we get this going. And this Department of Homeland Security, I think they potentially could step in and pay for part of this because of their concern of safety of the food and livestock supply and so forth. So this is not about us trying to put cost on you. This is trying to protect our industry and our livelihood. You know, I'll tell you what, if we got foot and mouth disease in this country, with where we're at right now, it would cost, I don't know how many billions of dollars it would cost the farm economy. It'd be huge. So if I had my way, we'd stand the initial cost just to get this thing stood up. And, you know, given this budget climate, I don't know if that's realistic or not, but that's what I'd like to do, just get it going. But we'll have hearings, we'll listen to everybody, you know, try to come up with the right solution.
Okay, let me throw one in from someone who sent in one. Thanks to Alan Parrish, a Minnesota resident, Collin. I can now see. Where are the WTO negotiations and new treaties?
They're no place. They are dead in the water, and I believe they'll be dead in the water until they go back and rethink the entire premise of this round. In my opinion, has got to be scrapped, and we got to start over. And I think that's probably what's going to end up happening here in order to get this going again. You know, where this thing was heading, you know, they set up this round on I guess, you know, a premise that sounds reasonable, that the purpose of this round was to help developing nations, to help poorer nations, you know, improve their situation and wealth and so forth. But what ended up happening, it got hijacked by people like India and Brazil and so forth, which really, in my opinion, don't belong in those categories, but they're the ones that really became the problem in the end, number one. Number two, this idea that, I mean, these ideologues, these free trade ideologues, believe that free trade will fix anything. And they think that somehow or another, if you help these poor countries have free trade, that'll just raise their standard of living. And mostly what it does for a lot of these poor countries is undermine whatever agriculture they have. You know, and so you got the World Bank out there saying, we won't borrow you money unless you promise to be free traders. And then so they borrow money, they set up some agriculture infrastructure, and then they can't afford to farm because they can't have a price support system so people can survive, you know. So So I think they're going to have to go back to the drawing board. They're going to have to do along the line of what Tom said. You know, get this thing back into the realm of a fair trade negotiation, because we need to trade, but it's got to be fair, and we haven't had that with what we've been doing.
On the firewall over there, Roger, is that your name? Who's
Can
it?
you hear me?
Yeah.
Congressman, you and I visited a little bit earlier, but could you explain to the rest of the people here what a shadow bank is, please?
Can you speak up?
Can you explain to us what shadow banks are?
Shadow banks.
Oh, well, they're, you know, it's a terminology that's out there. Well, these big banks have been, you know, they're more than banks. I mean, Goldman Sachs, you know, is now a bank. Morgan Stanley is now a bank, but they're also broker dealers, and they're into all of their investment houses, and you know, into every other kind of thing that you can think of besides being banks. And they've created these different, either they've created or bought these different entities that can go outside the normal banking system and access capital and so forth without the capital requirements that the banks have on them. And this is part of how this whole thing got into be such a mess, because under the banking laws, you know, you have to have like 10% capital. But a lot of these outfits were down to 1% capital because of all this stuff that's been going on with CDOs and CDSs and so forth. In England or in Europe, it was even worse in some of the areas. So this is what got us into this mess, because they built a whole house of cards. You know, we allowed them to do this. And what's scary about this is what's going on right now in the Congress is a big lobbying attempt by these big banks to be able to keep this system going. And right now they're winning. You know, they've got so much money and so much influence, and we just cannot let this happen. You know, and the trouble is, this stuff is so complicated that the average citizen cannot figure out what's going on. I mean, this AIG thing, you know, if you read the stories about AIG, it never says in there that this money is being used to bail out these credit default swaps. They never say that. You know why? Because the financial writers and everybody that's involved in this, they know better. They know the American people wouldn't like that, you know. So this is couched in the terms that you got to bail them out, because otherwise the whole financial thing will collapse and scare the hell out of everybody, you know. Well, I got news to you. It's collapsed. You know, they say, well, we can't nationalize the banks. I got news to you, news for you. The banks are effectively nationalized now. You know, we probably just as well say it. And if the ones that aren't nationalized are probably going to be nationalized before this is over. You know, and as I said earlier, there's going to be a lot more money put into this. So this regulatory structure let these guys create all this stuff. Some of them are called shadow banks. Some of them, you know, they have all kinds of different acronyms for this stuff. But back on the farm, you know, we used to call this a license to steal, you know, kind of what they have. But.
Well, before we go to the other one, I got several cards here and saying, basically, what's your thoughts on the president's proposal to